The barber who played between haircuts. In the soot-streaked trade district of Emberfall, where the air forever carried the mingled scents of coal smoke, fresh bread, and hot iron, there stood a narrow shop wedged stubbornly between a bakery and a cobbler's workshop. The bakery exhaled warmth and sweetness from dawn until dusk. The cobbler hammered rhythmically through the day, leather creaking and nails tapping in patient percussion. Between them, quieter and more unassuming, hung a modest wooden sign carved in careful letters. Marrow's Cuts and Shaves. The paint on the sign had begun to peel at the corners. The door hinges squeaked faintly when opened. The windows were clean but slightly wavy with age, distorting the world beyond them just enough to make it seem softer than it was. The shop was not grand, it was not fashionable, but it was steady. Inside worked Aldrin Marrow. He was not a tall man nor a broad one. He carried himself without swagger or particular distinction. His hair, brown threaded with the earliest hints of silver, was always neatly tied back. His sleeves were perpetually rolled to his forearms, revealing steady hands that bore no tremor even after the longest days. Those hands were his livelihood, his pride, and though he rarely admitted it, even his comfort. Aldrin was known throughout the district for two things: the smoothness of his razor and the quietness of his presence. Men who disliked chatter came to him. Laborers who wanted a trim without gossip sat gratefully in his chair. Even the occasional guard, armor creaking as he lowered himself into the worn leather seat, appreciated that Aldrin did not pry. He asked simple questions when required, nodded at appropriate intervals, and let silence breathe when silence was needed. He had not always lived in Emberfall. In his younger years, before the gray had touched his temples, Aldrin had followed the caravan roads. He had traveled through valleys where the wind sang across tall grass and through mountain passes where snow clung stubbornly even in spring. He cut hair beneath canvas awnings and beside campfires. He shaved merchants before trade negotiations and trimmed the beards of mercenaries before battle. From those years he gathered coin, yes, but more importantly he gathered stories. Stories of distant cities where towers pierced the clouds. Stories of strange beasts glimpsed at the edges of lantern light. Stories of love, loss, betrayal, triumph. They layered inside him like sediment in stone. And somewhere along those long roads he had acquired a guitar. It had been payment from a traveling bard who lacked coin but possessed gratitude. The instrument was old even then. Its body bore scratches and burn marks from too many nights too close to flame. One corner had been repaired with a careful inlay of darker wood. The strings had been replaced countless times. But when Aldrin first plucked them, the sound had surprised him. Warm, rounded patience. He had not been trained. No master had corrected his posture or scolded his timing. He learned as he did most things quietly, persistently. In the evenings after tending to customers on the road, he would sit beside the fatting firelight and let his fingers wander. At first, the sounds were clumsy. Gradually, they became deliberate. Music, he discovered, was not so different from barbering. Both required rhythm, both required listening, both demanded a certain trust in one's hands. When Aldrin finally settled in Emberfall and purchased the narrow shop between bread and leather, the guitar came with him. It became a habit, almost a ritual, that after sweeping the floor free of clipped hair and rinsing the last traces of soap from his basins, he would lock the door halfway, leave the windows cracked open, and sit in his chair facing the street. And he would play. Not loudly, never for attention. Just enough for the notes to drift like thin ribbons of smoke into the evening air. At first, few paid notice. Emberfall was a city of noise, forge hammers, wagon wheels, shouting vendors, clattering mugs. But gradually, people began to slow their steps when passing Marrow's shop at dusk. A child might tug at her mother's hand to linger. An old man might pause under the pretense of adjusting his coat. The music did not demand to be heard, it invited. On the twilight that would later be remembered in hushed voices throughout the district, the forge fires burned lower than usual. The sky was painted in streaks of amber and bruised purple. A thin wind slipped through the streets, tugging at loose shutters and carrying the scent of distant rain. Aldrin had just finished shaving a cooper whose laugh had shaken the mirrors. After seeing the man out, he swept the fine dark clippings from the floor, each stroke of the broom methodical and unhurried. He wiped down his razor with oil, folded his towels, and exhaled softly. Another day done. He reached for his guitar. The wood felt familiar beneath his fingers. The strings hummed faintly as he adjusted them, tuning by ear as he always did. Outside, the cobbler's hammering had ceased. The bakery's ovens were cooling. The district was settling. He had just begun a gentle progression, 3 chords that rolled into one another like quiet waves, when he heard it. At first, he thought it was the wind slipping oddly between buildings. Then it came again. A sound sharp and thin, trembling at the edges. Not the yowl of a cat, not the bark of a stray dog. It was higher, stranger. There was something in it that prickled the skin. Aldrin's fingers stilled against the strings. He tilted his head, listening. The sound came from just beyond his door, near the rain barrel that collected runoff from the bakery's roof. A faint crackle accompanied the whimper, like embers shifting in a hearth. Slowly, Aldrin rose from his chair and set the guitar aside. He moved without haste but without carelessness either. Years of shaving men who trusted him with blades had ingrained in him a deliberate caution. He stepped toward the door and pushed it open. The evening air met him, cooler now. The sky had darkened another shade. And there, curled awkwardly beside the rain barrel, was something that did not belong in any trade district. A baby dragon's. For a long moment, Aldrin did not breathe. The creature was perhaps the length of a large hound, though its wings, folded clumsily against its body, seemed oversized and ill-fitted as if it had not yet grown into them. Its scales shimmered like molten copper, catching the last threads of daylight and turning them to liquid fire. Tiny ridges ran along its spine. Its tail was coiled tightly around itself, the tip twitching with nervous energy. Smoke drifted from its nostrils in uncertain puffs. It sniffled, and when it did, a faint orange glow flickered in the back of its throat. Aldrin had heard the stories, as everyone in Emberfall had. Dragons that scorched entire valleys, dragons whose wings blotted out the sun, dragons that hoarded gold and devoured livestock and answered insult with annihilation. But the creature before him did not resemble those legends. It resembled a frightened child. Its large eyes, bright, molten gold ringed with darker ember, flicked up and met his. It squeaked. The sound was almost indignant, almost pleading. A small burst of flame hiccuped from its mouth, striking the cobblestones with a sharp hiss. A black scorch mark spread outward like spilled ink. Aldrin's heart thudded once, hard enough that he felt it in his throat. He did not run. Running would startle it. And something in the dragon's posture, its tightly drawn limbs, the trembling of its wings, spoke not of aggression but of fear. He crouched slowly, lowering himself until he was closer to its level. "Easy now," he murmured. The words meant nothing to the dragon. But tone meant everything. He had learned that much from years of holding razors to uncertain throats. People did not always respond to language. They responded to steadiness. The dragon's tail thumped against the stone. Sparks jumped where it struck. Its nostrils flared, releasing another anxious curl of smoke. Aldrin considered his options. He knew nothing of dragon keeping, nothing of their habits, their tempers, their instincts. But he knew nerves. He knew the tremble in a man's jaw before a wedding. He knew the restless tapping of fingers before a duel. He knew the shallow breathing of someone who had received bad news. Fear in all its forms shared a rhythm. And rhythm could be answered. Slowly, very slowly, Aldrin rose to his feet. The dragon tensed. "I'll be right back," he said softly, though again, it understood only the cadence. He stepped backward into the shop, never turning his back fully, and retrieved his guitar. When he returned to the doorway, the dragon had not moved. It watched him warily, head slightly tilted. He did not approach it directly. Instead, he sat down on the threshold of his shop, the familiar worn wood beneath him, and rested the guitar across his knee. For a brief moment, silence hovered between them. Then his fingers brushed the strings. The first notes were tentative, gentle. A single chord allowed to breathe. Another's lower groundings. He chose a melody he often played for restless children waiting on stools while their fathers were shaved. A slow progression that rose and fell like a sleeping chest. Predictable, reassuring. The dragon's ears, small fin-like ridges along its head, twitched. Its eyes narrowed slightly, not in threat but in concentration. Aldrin kept his movements smooth, no sudden shifts, no dramatic flourishes. The melody wound outward into the evening air, threading itself through the quiet street. The dragon's crackling whimpers softened. Its breathing, which had been sharp and uneven, began to lengthen. Smoke no longer streamed wildly. Instead, it drifted in faint puffs that seemed to echo the tempo of the music. Aldrin did not smile, he did not speak. He simply played. The dragon uncoiled its tail slightly. Its wings relaxed, settling more comfortably against its sides. The glow in its throat dimmed from frantic flare to a steady ember. Minutes passed. The last light drained from the sky. And there, in the fatting glow of Emberfall's forge fires, beneath windows where curious faces had just begun to peek through curtains, a human barber played the gentlest concert the city had ever known. Not for coins, not for applause, but for a trembling creature who needed, more than anything else in that moment, to feel that the world was not about to burn. The gathering storm. News did not travel in Emberfall by formal decree or ringing bell. It traveled by breaths. A baker's apprentice stepped into the street for air and froze at the sight down the lane. A woman collecting cooled loaves followed his gaze and nearly dropped her basket. A cobbler, summoned by their silence, leaned out his door and swore under his breath. A dragon. However small, however curled and quiet, it was still a dragon. Within minutes, whispers skittered across the district faster than sparks on dry straw. Marrow's got a beast outside his shop. A dragon, they say. Impossible. Go look. Shutters creaked open just enough for eyes to peer through. Doors remained bolted, but not fully. Fear and curiosity wrestled in equal measure. Mothers pulled children back by the shoulders. Laborers, still in their soot-stained aprons, stood uncertainly at corners, craning their necks for a glimpse. In the center of it all, seated on the worn threshold of his narrow shop, Aldrin Marrow continued to play. The baby dragon lay curled at his feet, copper scales reflecting the dim lantern light that now flickered to life along the street. Its massive head rested near the toe of his boot. Each exhale released only warm air, no longer wild smoke, no sudden bursts of flame. The faint orange glow in its throat had faded to a banked ember. The melody wrapped around it like a blanket. It was not triumphant music, it was not bold. It was patient. The rhythm flowed like a steady pulse beneath everything else. The distant murmur of anxious townsfolk, the nervous shifting of feet on cobblestones, the creak of leather and wood. Then came the sound that tightened every spine in the district. Armors. Two city guards pushed through the gathering onlookers, their helmets slightly askew from hurried donning. Their spears were held forward, though neither man appeared eager to use them. The polished tips trembled faintly, catching reflections of lantern light. They had been stationed near the central square when the first rumors reached them. By the time they arrived, sweat already dampened their collars despite the cooling air. One guard, young, jaw still too smooth for the weight of his uniform, took a single step forward. Then he stopped. The sight before him did not align with any drill or instruction he had been given. There was no roaring beast snapping at civilians. There was no blazing storefront. There was only a barber's and a sleeping dragon. The hatchling's tail gave a lazy twitch, claws scraping lightly against stone, but it did not lift its head. Its breathing was deep and even. The older guard swallowed. Marrow, he whispered urgently, careful not to raise his voice. Step away from it. Aldrin did not stop playing. He did not even look up at first. His fingers continued their careful dance across the strings, adjusting pressure, shaping tone. After a moment, he shook his head slightly, once firm but unhurried. The younger guard shifted his weight. The scrape of metal greaves against cobblestone was small but sharp in the relative quiet. The dragon's eyes fluttered open. The change was immediate. Its pupils narrowed. A faint spark flickered at the corner of its mouth, lighting the delicate edges of its teeth. The ember in its throat pulsed brighter, reacting to the tension rippling through the air. Aldrin heard it, the shift. Without pausing, he altered the melody. The tempo slowed by a fraction. The chords dipped lower, grounding themselves. The bright upper notes softened into a hum that vibrated more than it rang. He introduced a gentle, repetitive pattern, 3 notes descending, one rising, a subtle reassurance. The spark at the dragon's mouth wavered. Its ears twitched again. The tension in its wings eased. Another breath escaped it, not a hiss but a sigh. The glow receded. The guards stared in disbelief. The older one lowered his spear slightly. By the forge, he muttered under his breath. Neither man understood what was happening, only that whatever fragile balance held the scene together depended entirely on the quiet man seated with a guitar across his knee. They backed away slowly. Each step was deliberate, careful not to scrape or clatter. The younger guard kept his eyes fixed on the dragon until distance granted him a fraction of courage. The crowd retreated with them, forming a wide, uncertain perimeter. No one dared interrupt the music again. Above the rooftops of Emberfall, clouds gathered. They did not roll in with obvious violence. They drifted, thickened, pressed closer together as though drawn by unseen gravity. The last streaks of twilight disappeared behind their dark underbellies. The air changed. It grew heavier. The faint breeze that had threaded through the streets stilled entirely. Lantern flames flickered sideways, then steadied. Far beyond the city walls, beyond the fields where late crops bowed under the weight of evening dew, something immense moved through the sky. The mother had noticed. Dragonkind did not track their young by sight alone. They were creatures of resonance, of vibration, of tremor, of deep harmonic awareness that threaded through air and earth alike. A hatchling's distress rippled outward in patterns too subtle for human ears but unmistakable to one born of flame and stone. Earlier, that resonance had shattered the stillness of distant peaks. Fear, confusion, separation. The ancient dragon had lifted her massive head from her resting place among blackened crags and listened. Her wings, vast and scarred by centuries, unfurled with a sound like distant thunder. With a single beat, she had taken to the sky. She was older than any living memory in Emberfall. Her scales were darker than volcanic glass, veined faintly with molten lines that pulsed like the slow circulation of magma beneath the world's crust. Scars marked her flanks, testament to battles fought and survived. Her eyes burned not bright like her hatchling, but deep and steady like coals that had smoldered through ages. The air around her shimmered with heat distortion as she flew. Below her, forests bent and rivers rippled at the force of displaced wind. Birds scattered in frantic bursts. Herd animals bolted for cover. She followed the fatting echoes of her child's distress. She expected chaos. She expected smoke. She expected to scent charred wood and human panic rising like a feast laid before her. Instead, as she neared Emberfall, the pattern changed. The frantic resonance she had tracked weakened. In its place came something else. It was small, strange, thin as thread compared to the deep-throated harmonics of dragonkind. But it was steady, measured, gentle. A vibration carried upward through the evening air, so subtle it might have been mistaken for wind against stone. Yet to her senses, attuned across centuries, it was unmistakable. Harmonies. The ancient dragon slowed. Her wings beat once, twice, then shifted into a silent glide above the thickening cloud cover. She circled, vast silhouette concealed within gathering storm. She listened. There was no shriek of terror, no clash of steel, no explosion of flame. Her hatchling's resonance, once sharp and fractured, now flowed smooth and calm, synchronized to something outside itself. The great dragon's mind, old and vast, searched for explanation. What force within a human settlement could soothe a dragon's fear? She descended lower. Clouds parted reluctantly around her immense form. The moonlight, what little pierced the storm cover, caught the edges of her wings in silver. From her vantage above Emberfall, she saw the city as mortals rarely did. Clustered roofs, winding alleys, lanterns glowing like scattered embers in a hearth. And at the edge of the trade district, a point of resonance. Small humans. Steady. She circled once more, confusion threading through her ancient awareness. Her kind communicated through vibrations of chest and throat, through seismic pulses that traveled across stone. But this was crafted, intentional. A patterned sequence of tones rising and falling with careful repetition. It was not dragon song. It was something else. Below, Aldrin continued to play, unaware that every note he shaped climbed into the sky like a signal fire. The hatchling's body was fully relaxed now, limbs loose, head resting once more near his boot. Its breathing matched the rhythm almost perfectly, inhale on the descending notes, exhale on the rise. The gathered townsfolk did not notice the sky's transformation. They were too fixed on the street. Too fixed on the impossible scene of a dragon sleeping to music. The first tremor reached the city walls like distant thunder. Not loud, but deep. A vibration that hummed through stone foundations and up through the soles of boots. Several people gasped. Aldrin felt it through the wood beneath him, a faint shudder. He did not stop playing. Far beyond the outer gates, talons the size of wagon wheels touched earth. The landing did not announce itself with fire. It arrived as pressure, as weight. The ground bowed subtly beneath the impact, dust leapt from dry soil, fence posts quivered. The ancient dragon folded her wings with controlled precision, each membrane settling along her sides like dark sails furled before a storm. She did not roar. She did not unleash flame. She lowered her immense head and listened. The human melody drifted outward across fields and over stone. It was impossibly small compared to her own power. Yet it carried something she recognized. Care, not dominance, not threat. The hatchling's resonance thrummed contentment, braided seamlessly with the foreign tones. The mother dragon's eyes narrowed. She stepped forward, each movement deliberate enough to avoid unnecessary destruction. Grass ignited briefly beneath the residual heat of her body, then smoldered out. She reached the outer walls of Emberfall and paused. The stone fortifications, built to deter raiders and wolves, were meaningless before her size. She could shatter them with a single strike. Instead, she moved along their length, seeking the strongest echo of her child. She found it near the trade district. And there she waited just beyond human sight, massive form partially veiled by shadow and cloud. She did not yet reveal herself. She listened. The barber's melody shifted again, subtle variation, gentle exploration within the same comforting structure. The hatchling stirred happily, a soft trill vibrating from its chest. The mother dragon felt it. Felt the calm. Felt the absence of fear. And so, for the first time in centuries, an ancient dragon stood outside a human city not as an immediate force of destruction, but as a mother, listening in wary silence to the fragile music of something she did not yet understand. The power of a mother's. Night fell fully over Emberfall. Not gently. The last traces of violet twilight were swallowed by thick, low-hanging clouds that pressed close over the rooftops like a darkened ceiling. Lanterns flickered to life along the trade district, their flames wavering in uneasy drafts. The usual hum of evening, laughter spilling from tavern doors, distant clatter of tankards, murmured gossip between neighbors, had faded into a hush so complete it felt unnatural. In that hush, Aldrin Marrow continued to play. His fingers ached. The pads were tender from constant pressure against the strings, joints stiffening from hours of careful control. A thin line of sweat traced down his temple despite the cool air. He was aware of the discomfort in a distant way, as one might notice a dull ache behind the eyes and choose to ignore it. He did not dare stop. Beside him, curled near the toe of his boot, the dragon hatchling slept soundly. Its copper scales caught the lantern light and returned it in softened glimmers, like banked embers in a hearth long after the flames had died down. Each slow breath expanded its small ribcage, then released in a gentle wash of warmth. The air around it smelled faintly of smoke and heated stone, but not sharply, more like the comforting scent of a fireplace on a winter evening. Its tail lay limp now, no longer twitching in anxious arcs. One wing draped loosely across its side, membrane translucent where the lantern light passed through. The melody Aldrin played had settled into a steady rhythm, low and repetitive, built on simple intervals that rose and fell with predictable comfort. He did not ornament it. He did not experiment. He kept it grounded. Around him, unseen behind shutters and half-cracked doors, the city watched. No one moved. Even the two guards who had retreated earlier stood at the far edge of the street, spears lowered but not discarded, eyes fixed on the impossible tableau. A barber and a dragon sharing the quiet of night. Then, the ground trembled. At first, it was subtle. A faint vibration under the wood of the threshold, a ripple in a nearby puddle, a hanging sign swaying though no wind touched it. Aldrin felt it through the soles of his boots. He faltered not in rhythm but in breaths. The tremor deepened. Windows rattled in their frames. Tiles shifted against one another with dry scraping sounds. Somewhere down the lane, a clay pot toppled from a windowsill and shattered. Gasps erupted from hidden onlookers. A shadow stretched across the cobblestones, vast, shifting, swallowing lantern light in its path. The dragon hatchling stirred, lifting its head groggily, its ears twitched. And then she stepped into view. The mother dragon did not burst into the district in a fury of flame. She entered with dreadful certainty. Her form filled the narrow street, vast shoulders scraping dangerously close to upper-story balconies. Each step cracked stone beneath talons thick as tree trunks. Heat radiated from her in palpable waves, warping the air around her massive frame. Her scales were not copper-bright like her child. They were dark. Not merely black, but volcanic, layered with faint lines of molten glow that pulsed beneath the surface like slow-moving lava under crusted rock. Scars etched her hide, pale and jagged, relics of ancient battles. Her eyes burned. Twin suns focused entirely on the small copper shape resting beside the human barber. Aldrin's hands stilled. The last note faded into silence. And in that silence, the weight of the dragon's presence pressed down like the sky itself had lowered. The hatchling blinked once, then chirped. The sound was bright and delighted, utterly without fear. It scrambled to its feet, wings flapping clumsily in excitement. Its claws skittered against stone as it bounded forward, nearly tripping over its own tail. The mother lowered her immense head. The gesture, though slow, displaced enough air to make Aldrin's coat flutter. She inhaled deeply, scenting her child. The hatchling reached her foreleg and pressed against it, chirping again, higher, eager content. It rubbed its head along her scales with obvious affection. The great dragon nudged it gently with the edge of her snout. The touch was precise, controlled beyond human comprehension. A creature capable of shattering fortifications with a careless motion instead adjusted her strength to cradle something fragile. She examined the hatchling carefully, snout brushing along wings, along spine, along tail, searching for injury, for burn, for harm inflicted by foreign hands. Finding none. Only warmth. Only calm. The mother lifted her head and turned her gaze to Aldrin Marrow. The distance between them was no more than 20 paces. It might as well have been the width of eternity. A single exhale from her nostrils rolled across the street like a furnace door flung open. Heat slammed into Aldrin's chest, stealing breath from his lungs. The wood of his shop's sign creaked under the sudden temperature change. The lantern flames guttered violently. One blast of fire. One. And the narrow shop, the bakery, the cobbler's workshop, and the man seated on the threshold would vanish in an inferno. The city held its breath. No guard moved. No shout rang out. There was only the dragon's gaze and the fragile human beneath it. Aldrin's heart pounded so violently he feared it might be audible. His palms were slick against the neck of the guitar. Every instinct screamed at him to flee, to dive inside, to hide, to run blindly through the back door and pray. But running would mean turning his back. Turning his back would mean acknowledging fear. And somehow, impossibly, he understood that fear would be red. So he did the only thing he knew how to do. He lifted the guitar again. His hands trembled not from cold, but from the sheer proximity of annihilation. His fingers hovered above the strings for a heartbeat too long. Then they descended. The first note rang out thin but clear. It wavered. He steadied it with the next. He did not return to the previous melody. That one had been for a frightened child. This one needed to be different. He chose lower tones, slower packing, space between notes wide enough to show restraint. He allowed silence to exist between phrases, a subtle offering of deference. It was not submission. It was respect. The melody unfolded like a lullaby, shaped not by training, but by instinct, gentle arcs of sound that neither rose too high nor pressed too forcefully forward. There was no bravado in it, no attempt at grandeur. Only care. The great dragon's eyes narrowed slightly. The notes brushed against her senses. To human ears, the music was soft. To her, attuned to resonance deeper than mountains, it was a fragile vibration trembling against the vastness of her being. Small, inconsequential. And yet, there was no discord in it. No tremor of challenge. No sharp spike of terror. The hatchling chirped approvingly and settled against her foreleg, curling its tail in contentment. Its breathing matched the rhythm just as it had before. The mother felt it. The harmony between them. She extended her awareness outward, tasting the air not with tongue but with instinct. The human's heartbeat was fast, frantic, nearly, but his hands did not lash out. His posture did not lean toward aggression. He remained sated, exposed, offering nothing but sound. The melody continued. One phrase, then another. Aldrin's fear did not vanish. It remained in his chest like a trapped bird, but he did not allow it into his hands. He focused on pressure, on timing, on the memory of campfires long ago where music had been the only barrier against loneliness. He played as though soothing something precious, not as though pleading for his life. The dragon lowered her head slightly, not enough to diminish her presence, but enough to close the distance between them. Her eyes locked with his. In that gaze lay centuries. Battles, Losses. Territory defended. Offspring guarded with merciless ferocity. She could see the fragility of him, the thinness of his limbs, the soft skin vulnerable to a single claw. She could see the fear. But she could also see that he had not touched her child in harm. Had not struck. Had not bound. Had not fled. He had stayed. The melody softened further, resolving into a repeating cadence like a final exhale. The hatchling gave a satisfied trill and pressed closer to its mother's leg. Silence stretched. Then, the great dragon lowered her massive head. Not to strike, not to threaten, but in acknowledgments. It was a movement subtle in scale but enormous in meaning. Not submission, recognition. Aldrin did not stop playing immediately. He allowed the final phrase to resolve fully, gently, before lifting his fingers from the strings. The last note faded into the thick night air. For a suspended heartbeat, no one moved. Then the dragon shifted. She extended one colossal foreclaw, careful beyond measure, and guided the hatchling into its curve. The smaller dragon climbed willingly, wings fluttering once before settling securely. The mother unfolded her wings. The motion was breathtaking. Membranes stretched wide, blotting out what little moonlight filtered through the clouds. The air displaced by their movement slammed into buildings, rattling every shutter and sign in the district. Dust spiraled upward in violent gusts. With a single thunderous beat, she lifted from the cobblestones. Stone cracked further under the force. Several loose tiles shattered as they were torn from rooftops and flung aside. But no flames followed. No destructive arc of fire. She ascended straight upward, hatchling cradled securely. Another beat of wings carried her above the rooftops. Another carried her into the waiting clouds. And then she was gone. The storm above seemed to exhale in her absence. The pressure lifted, the trembling ceased. Lantern flames steadied. Silence lingered in the wake of her departure, broken only by the distant fatting rush of wings. When the winds finally settled, Aldrin remained seated exactly where he had been. His guitar rested across his lap. His hands lay still upon it. Only then did he allow himself to breathe fully. The street began to stir. Doors creaked open, faces emerged, pale and stunned. The guards stepped forward slowly, as though afraid the dragon might return if they moved too quickly. Someone laughed, a sharp, disbelieving sound. Someone else began to cry in relief. But Aldrin did not rise immediately. He stared upward at the patch of sky where the dragon had vanished. He did not think of heroism. He did not think of legend. He thought only of the small copper hatchling whose breathing had matched his melody. By morning, the story had spread far beyond the trade district. By midday, it had reached every corner of Emberfall. By nightfall, travelers were already carrying the tale to distant roads. They would speak of bravery, of impossible calm, of the night a dragon spared a city. But the truth was far simpler. A nervous baby dragon had needed comfort, and a human unaware of the full, terrifying power of its mother had chosen music instead of fear. That choice, fragile and fleeting as a single note in the dark, had been enough to turn fire into silence, and silence into peace.